But first, breaking tonight, it seems the Department of Justice and Donald Trump's legal teams may have agreed on a possible so-called special master to review the documents seized in the search at Mar-a-Lago. Each side had proposed two possible candidates to provide that independent review ordered by federal judge Aileen Cannon. The Trump team rejected both of the DOJ's proposed choices, but tonight, the DOJ has just said that they would accept one of the two from the Trump team. Raymond Dearie, a retired U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of New York, who was nominated to that seat by Ronald Reagan in '86. He also served on the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. We will talk more about him in a moment. But just because it seems they've agreed on who should be the special master, that doesn't answer the huge outstanding question about which documents the special master should be reviewing. Donald Trump's legal team also filed a motion today trying to keep the judge's order in place, which does not allow the government to use any documents seized from Mar-a-Lago for their criminal investigation until that special master reviews them first. The DOJ filed papers late last week asking the judge to lift part of her order just as it pertains to classified documents. But here's the key argument that I find fascinating here. Trump's lawyers object to the government using the documents at all right now. And one of the central points they make is that Trump had the power to declassify them. So these are just potentially basic presidential records, just like all others. But here's the problem. They're not saying he actually did declassify them, just that he could have. They cite an executive order by President Obama which lays out the process to declassify government documents. Quote, the president enjoys absolute authority under the executive order to declassify any information. There's no legitimate contention that the chief executive's declassification of documents requires approval of bureaucratic components of the executive branch. Except that the executive order they're citing does lay out a whole process for declassification, standards to oversee the process, etc. But most importantly, his own lawyers are dancing around this issue and saying Trump could have declassified the documents if he wanted to. But they're not actually saying he did. So why stop short? I have a good guess. Remember, even the former president himself said he declassified them. Remember when the FBI released that photo of the top secret folders they found at Mar-a-Lago with the documents laid out on the floor, Trump posting on Truth Social, quote, terrible the way the FBI during the raid of Mar-a-Lago threw documents haphazardly all over the floor, perhaps pretending it was me that did it, and then started taking pictures of them for the public to see. Thought they wanted them kept secret. Lucky I declassified. With Trump himself saying he declassified, why won't his own lawyers simply argue it? On this issue of who should have access to classified records, it's a critical question of whether the records are classified. Maybe it's because they don't think there's a legitimate argument that they can make that he did declassify. It seems the only evidence thus far is former Trump White House aide Kash Patel, who claimed Trump did so as a matter of course.
And then in December and January, on the way out, I witnessed him declassify whole sets of documents. So it is not incumbent upon President Trump and his lawyers and him as a target of this investigation to show he, in fact, did declassify them. It's up to the government, who has the burden of proof, who are trying to deprive a man of his liberty to show that no such order was, in fact, given.
Right, except when you're talking about whether classified documents should be treated differently from other documents. Now, look, whether he's making a legitimate argument or not, why not cite Patel as a witness? Maybe because for Trump's lawyers to cite Patel, they actually have to believe it's a real argument. Joining me now is former Associate White House Counsel under President Trump, May Mailman, and former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi. All right, Gene, let me start with you. Why do you think they aren't making the argument, even though former President Trump is saying that he declassified the documents?
Well, it's very simple. Outside a court of law, and you're not under oath, you can say a lot of things that aren't accurate or aren't supported by the evidence. But in a court of law, you have to present evidence. And it'd be very simple at this hearing, if they have one, the government would call an official or present an affidavit that says that these documents were classified and still are classified. They could do it with an affidavit or they could do it with a witness. And that hearing would take 5 minutes. That is why they're not doing that. I'm very familiar with the two attorneys the two lead attorneys for President Trump. One of them is Evan Corcoran. The other is Jim Trusty. And they have a lot of integrity. And they wouldn't put something in a filing that they could not back up. So that's probably one good reason why they're not putting in the filing that these documents were classified.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Patel, I don't know him, but you can say a lot of things when you're not in a court of law and you're not under oath.
May Mailman, it is hard to come to almost any other conclusion about it, because putting aside whether you need the documents to be classified for any charges, et cetera, on this specific question of whether classified documents should be treated differently, and Trump's team going in there and saying no, they should be treated just like all other records. Well, isn't the strongest argument they could possibly make, and they make it in theory, that the documents are declassified?
Well, I think they're making the right argument at the right time here. So this is just, do we need a special master, yes or no? And they're trying to say, yes, we do need a special master. And the special master's entire job is going to be figuring out which documents are classified and which are not.
Really?
So if they're just coming
I didn't
in
know
here,
that that's what the special master did. My understanding was that the special master was there to determine what's privileged, meaning attorney-client privilege, I guess potentially executive privilege, but I didn't think the special master is there to determine what's classified and what's not. That's not his job.
I think that the special master is really here to put documents in categories. So I think you have lots of different categories. So you've got, I think classified is going to be something that the special master should help identify.
Really?
Things that are not classified, but that are national security sensitive. So things that potentially could go to Espionage Act, things that should be returned to the president. And that things that should be returned to the president is key here, because if there are classified documents, I think it's easier for DOJ to make an argument that those should not be returned to the president. So that's why classified really matters.
I agree with you that it matters. I just don't get what the honest argument is as to why they're not making the argument. I mean, it's clear to me that Gene's right. They don't want to argue this because his lawyers aren't buying it at this point. And no, I mean, you disagree, May?
No, I think that they should have made the argument. I think that it's a good argument to make that Trump declassified all of them.
Right.
That said, I think a couple of things. One, I do think it's too early. And two, they have to get this right. There's something very belligerent, I think, about saying these documents are declassified without even having a list of what these documents are. So once they have a list, once they know, then they can make that argument and sound a little bit more credible per document.
I don't know, Gene. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but what do you make of it?
Well, I agree with May on this, that Judge Raymond Dearie, way back in the day, 30 years ago, I had a civil tax case in front of him, and his reputation was impeccable. So I have a lot of confidence that Judge Dearie is going to move fast. He's going to move with alacrity. But I agree with May. He's going to have to separate the wheat from the chaff. He's going to put documents in categories. What is arguably attorney-client privilege? Right. What is arguably executive privilege? And what's classified. I guess I'm a Pollyanna. I don't think this is a heavy lift. I don't.
Yeah, but a special master is not there to decide what's classified and what's not. I mean,
well, I disagree with you a little bit on that.
All right.
Yeah, I do. And I think May's right.
Tell me why. No, tell me why. This is why we have this conversation.
That's why you got me on the show.
Yeah.
I say there's 1,000 documents. Judge Dearie's going to have the parties come in and say, of those 1,000 documents, okay, folks, what do you think is attorney-client privilege? What do you think is executive? And what do you think is classified? So he's going to have 3 boxes. Okay, put them in the boxes. I'm going to look at them, and if I think you're right, I'll make a decision on that. What if the government, just hypothetically, considers a classified document that is really attorney-client privilege?
Right. No, that's a separate issue, right?
Well, let me finish. So you are making a decision as to whether something is classified versus attorney-client privilege.
But only if there's an attorney-client issue. It's not as if the special master is going to sit there and is going to say, okay, we've got attorney-client here, we've got executive privilege here, and the third thing I have to do is decide which of these documents is classified or not. It's not what a special master does. But the two of you are going to disagree with me, and I'll leave it there. Because the beauty of this is that I invite people on who can disagree with me. They can make their cases, as the both of you are. Let me ask you to stick around for a minute, since it's a mystery appears to have been solved today with regard to former President Trump popping up in D.C. over the weekend. Many in the media, political gossip world were speculating wildly about the reason for his trip to the nation's capital last night. They all focused on Donald Trump's golf shoes and why he didn't change out of them before getting on his flight. Golf shoes on an airplane. Only a criminal would allow that to happen. Some on the left insinuating and certainly hoping that Trump's quick, casual trip meant it was unplanned and he had to rush because maybe he was moments away from turning himself in on the long-awaited criminal indictment many on the left had been hoping would arrive. MSNBC legal analyst Glenn Kirshner tweeting, "I'd settle for a negotiated self-surrender to be arraigned. Probably too much to hope for." That was in response to podcaster Allison Gill tweeting, quote, "Something weird is going on. No one, and I mean no one, knows why Donald has arrived in D.C. tonight looking disheveled in golf clothes. It could be something totally inconsequential, but something tells me it's not." Well, it appears likely it was inconsequential and may have only been a fashion crime. Turns out Trump was in town to golf. Presumably that's why he needed his golf shoes. This photo, snapped by a photographer for the AP, shows Trump at his National Golf Club in Sterling, Virginia, where he is driving around in his golf cart and standing around on the golf driving range. So now that mystery has seemingly been solved, let's get to some other developing news tonight. The New York Times reporting that, quote, the Justice Department has issued about 40 subpoenas over the past week seeking information about the actions of former President Donald J. Trump and his associates related to the 2020 election and the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. Now, here on this show, we don't get hysterical, we don't jump to conclusions. I've long believed that the DOJ will not indict Donald Trump himself for anything related to January 6th. And I don't think this changes my mind. But it certainly does seem to indicate that people very close to Donald Trump could be in trouble. The Times reports that some of Trump's closest aides have been subpoenaed. It doesn't mean that they're in trouble per se, including Trump's former social media director, Dan Scavino. But I still believe this isn't primarily about January 6th, and it's more about those fake electors in certain swing states who went to great lengths, including submitting phony, formal-looking documents with names of people claiming to be electoral college electors in battleground states that went to Biden. They tried to have the vote counts ignored and instead just have Mike Pence or the Congress declare Trump the winner. I think the Times may have buried the lead to make it seem more sensational because they reported further down, quote, the Justice Department also executed search warrants to seize electronic devices from people involved in the so-called fake electors effort in swing states, including Mr. Epstein, a longtime Trump advisor, and Mr. Roman, a campaign strategist. I still think, separate from the document fight, this totally separate issue, which we discussed, I think that this is about not the January 6th, but about the electors. Let's bring back in May Melman and Gene Rossi. May, what do you make of this report?
Well, you know, it's hard to get past, as you say, the sensational headline, which I think is really, to me, makes me wonder what sort of crimes we're trying to, you know, investigate here that involves this sweeping a reach of 40 people. And it seems to me like there's a First Amendment issue because there are, you know, we still live in a free country. You can still say that the election was rigged, even if you don't have enough evidence. I mean, you can still, you know, have a parade about it if you'd like. Yeah. So
you can,
you know,
Gene Rossi, but what you can't do is you can't send official phony-looking documents into government bodies and claim that these are the actual electors.
Well, the First Amendment allows you to do a lot of things, but you can't engage in violence. That's the whole Brandenburg or incite it. And the second thing is you can't submit false documents to impede an electoral process. So here's the concern I have if I were President Trump and the people surrounding him. He may not be charged in the end of the day, but the people around him, there may be collateral damage, Mark Meadows included. And these 40 subpoenas, bear in mind, the DOJ did not issue a list to the public and say, hey, here's the 40 subpoenas that we've issued because of Rule 60 and grand jury secrecy. There could be more subpoenas out there that the New York Times and other media outlets didn't pick up. And here's the other thing that's important, is that they seized cell phones from two key individuals in Trump world, and a seizure of cell phones usually results in the gathering of information. But I want to say this, President Trump and other people are not going to be indicted this year. I make a Joe Namath prediction. They're not going to be indicted if they have the evidence. If there is any charge brought, if, it won't be until May or April of next year, because it takes a long time in these grand jury DOJ investigations to get the information, to digest, collate it, and look it over. And there may be follow-up subpoenas. It's a long process.
Yep, I agree with you. I'm not sure May. I think you could see something earlier. I think the fake electors is where the action is. I don't think that it's going to be specifically with regard to January 6th, but we shall see. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.